Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. This podcast is hosted by Laura Amin, a voracious reader of romance and young adult novels. In this podcast, Laura interviews fellow readers and authors and asks them for book recommendations of what we should read next. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. We're so happy to have you back. So let's introduce ourselves.
Hi, I am Clara. I am a big reader, love to read, love to write, and I'm a seasonal reader. So this time of year is a really exciting time for me to read.
I love it.
And Laura, how about yourself?
We're going to dive into some of the things you read this season. So I'm excited. So I'm Laura, and this month I've been reading a lot of nonfiction books. And I just discovered that Jersey City Public Library, which is where I live, has a ton of new release ebooks available to borrow. So I've been going down deep into my TBR list thanks to that.
Nice. Well, before we get started on our actual individual books, I thought we could talk a little bit today about our preferred setting for reading. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you're like me, our listeners. I think Laura, you and I share this in common a little bit. There's definitely a time when I like to read. I like to have a particular setting when I read. So I thought we could talk about that a little bit. And I'll kick us off to say, because it's autumn, I mentioned I'm a seasonal reader. It's just prime time to read, right? Because you're not outside. It's a little bit chillier. You're not kind of sitting in a beach chair or whatever. But it's a good time to just kind of curl up with a good book, some hot chocolate or tea, and just get lost in the world. There's, a lot of rainy days and things like that. And for me, that feeling of coziness is just part of the experience of reading a lot of the books that I like to read. So it's kind of like curling up, having some tea. I have cats. I'm such a stereotype. But curling up with the cats while I read, it just makes me very content and happy.
I love it.
Do you have a preferred setting?
So I've been reading, now that I cannot read outdoors. I used to read in a park right outside my house, which was nice. But it's getting colder now. So I've been reading indoors. I've been reading in my room and just kind of cozying it up. I've been reading at night more often than in the mornings, which is typically my preferred reading time. But it's kind of nice. It's kind of like curling up just with tea and just reading a book and getting lost in the world.
Yeah. I mean, when I used to live in Manhattan, I definitely enjoyed reading on my commute. It was a way to kind of escape the commute. But full disclosure, I did leave before there was full Wi-Fi in the subway, and I might have ended up watching Netflix instead if I was there today. But I definitely liked reading during my commute. And I read more because of my commute. Just because, especially from Brooklyn into Manhattan when I lived there, it was about an hour-long commute. So, I'll read anywhere that I have time to kill, but I prefer, like I said, like we just discussed, just staying at home and enjoying the indoors and getting lost in a book.
Yeah, so I would tell you the Wi-Fi is spotty. It's not, I wouldn't watch Netflix on your Wi-Fi on your train. It doesn't work in every station. So just an FYI, it's helpful just to download different things here and there and just check in Google Maps, but it's not a Netflix version of Wi-Fi in the subway.
Okay. That's how long it's been since I've been to Manhattan.
We're not there in the future. That's the future. My commute is actually fairly short. I only have a 20-minute commute. So typically what I do is because I leave my house early, and then I read for about 20, 30 minutes when I get my coffee, and I just go before I go to the office, or even when I'm in the office before I clock in, I just read for 20 minutes. That's my kind of getting in alignment time, feeling good, feeling fun. That's what I do for me to feel good. I have to read. And then I get into work, and then there'll be times where there'll be breaks here and there. So I'll pick up my book and I'll read during lunchtime or do my commute back. But for the most part, commute, I don't read that often. I would read 5 to 10% within Kindle, because I read Kindle during the week. So it's not a lot of making a dent, but it's a little bit, into the book.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, one other thing I'll say is, for me, so I typically read in the evenings, like as I'm getting ready for bed, or close to getting ready for bed. And I find when I am intentional about reading instead of looking on my phone or watching TV, I'm actually able to sleep better. Obviously, that has to do with the fact that you're looking at, what is it, the blue light that's coming on from those devices. But I also find like my head is clearer, and I don't know, as much as I get wrapped up into a Netflix story and I wanted to keep watching or like rewatching The Office over and over again, I do find that I feel more frazzled and I don't sleep as well. But if I read a book, even though my mind is challenged, it makes I sleep better, and I don't come away like feeling like I am, it's too strong a word to say exhausted, but like tired in a way where you can't sleep, but you're tired. Whereas with the book, I feel like it's rewarding. I feel like I grew as a person, and I also feel ready to go to bed. So that's kind of my experience with it.
Yeah, I think for me, like reading has been such a change in my life. It's been a life changer. It has helped me with my anxiety. It has calmed me down a lot. I find it for me, that's been the greatest gift of reading. It's been the process of like, it calms me down. I get better sleep. I feel much more, I feel like I'm actually in a good space in my life. So it just feels more in alignment for me.
Yeah, and one more thing I'll add to that. I so agree with you. And I'll also add, it doesn't matter if I'm reading fiction, nonfiction, self-help, whatever the case may be, maybe not business books, but I also feel like it makes me more imaginative and creative in finding, well, first of all, I like to write, so it gives me more ideas for writing. But then on top of that, even when I go to work, which has literally nothing to do with reading or writing or anything, but I'm like, I can find solutions more easily, or I don't know. It's just, my mind is more productive than if I don't read. Like, I just feel like I've accomplished something that makes me want to accomplish more.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. I think that's the creativity that comes with it. There's a lot of creativity that gets inspired with it. The books can bring you into joy.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's move on to our books for this year, or for this month. I'm sorry. So I guess I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah, you read a lot of Halloween books, right?
Well, I attempted to read a lot of Halloween books. So I only got through one, which was a very long one. It's called The Secret History of Witches. It actually came out in hardcover last year around this time, I think. And it just recently came out in paperback. But I had the hardcover since last year and I hadn't read it. It's like over 500 or 600 pages, so it was a pretty big commitment. It's by Louisa Morgan. It's a story that tells the secret history of several generations of witches from one family, and so you go through and experience, the great-great-grandmother, great-grandmother, etc., all the way until the end. So it spans from, I want to say, I'm sorry, I should have had this written down first, but 1600s all the way to 1940s World War II time period with 5 generations of witches. Maybe it starts in the 1700s. I think I went too far back. But so what's interesting and cool about what the writer did, and I know she did a lot of research, was to kind of characterize each of those time periods and how women, who are the witches, because they're all females, how being a witch is impacted by the norms of the society, of that current society, right? And how even their husbands and their fathers interact with them, whether they know they're witches or they don't know that they're witches. So in some generations, the husbands can't know. In other generations, they do know, but they don't like it too much. So one thing she explores throughout those 5 generations is, I think there are some feminist undertones that go through that. The witches are characterized as coming from gypsy culture. So I have to say, in some of my critique, and maybe I'm not informed enough on some of it, but I didn't feel like I got enough understanding of really where she was basing some of this on, or what parts she was really making up, which is fine. I mean, you don't have to know that, but I feel like while she did try to put a lot of history into it, some of the detail, like outside of the World War II storyline, I mean, to me, any of it could have happened anytime, anywhere, any place. There wasn't a lot of specificity, but I'll get into that in a second. But so the themes that I did like her exploring is how, because they're witches, they have power, they have insight, they're stronger than men, they have all of these things. So how do they manage that in a world that is dominated by patriarchy, whereas in this story, matriarchy was where your power, your abilities came from. And so I thought that was pretty fascinating to see how she explored that. But so going to some of my critiques, so each generation, some of the stories really, it was like repeating the same thing. So, it would be, without giving too much away, because it isn't true for every generation, but it would be, okay, you find out that you're a witch. Somehow you have to learn what that means, whether that's coming from your mother and sister/aunt, whatever the case may be, as your teachers. You have to meet a guy, you have to procreate, you have to have a daughter to pass along the lineage. And so how that happened in each generation was kind of the story. And there was some variance, but it did get a little bit like, okay, same story, until you get to the last generation. So there was, for such a long book, I could stay engaged with that if you would just have given me more specificity, if I could really feel, smell, taste the time, if I really could, like, they're witches, right? So some of the explanation of the spells they cast and how they did it, it was there, but I've read stories where it's there's more description for a purpose. I mean, don't over describe for no end, but there was more description. I could understand it or see it or feel immersed in that world more in some other books that describe witchcraft. And witchcraft is pretty fascinating and intricate. So, I wasn't sure why that was missing as much. From my perspective, I know that it's got a lot of really positive reviews on Amazon. So again, just remember this is my take on it. The other thing, again, I don't want to give too much away, but the storyline in 1945, at that point, it did change. Like, this was a new approach to the storyline, but I just thought that I wasn't with how that particular storyline took place. Like, I guess there was something interesting about it. The only thing I'll say that won't spoil too much is that Queen Elizabeth is involved in that storyline. But how she's involved and what happens is just kind of like, what? And I guess you'd have to read it to get it. So enjoy the 500, 600 pages to see why I'm saying, for me, this is a book that I wouldn't probably recommend. It's not poorly written. It's not, she really put a lot into this book, so I don't want to dissuade someone if this is of interest. But for me and what my expectations were going into the book, I don't know, it felt a little shallow for me. not she's not shallow as a writer, but like it didn't have a depth of detail that I wanted in a book like that, if I'm going to spend that much time with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but because of that, and I was like, I am going to finish this book from beginning to end. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to give up in the middle of the book. I mean, it was interesting enough to keep reading. But I'll just make a couple of quick recommendations of some other books because it's Halloween season. I wanted to kind of recommend, I don't know, my focus was on witches. Last month it was on zombies. But I have read in the past a series by Mindy Klasky. Actually, Laura, I started reading this series when you and I worked together, and you were with me in the NYU bookstore when I first saw the first book in this series that I'm going to recommend. I'm sure you don't remember, but I was like, ooh, I got to come back and buy that book. But it's a series. It's called the Jane Madison series. It's a book. It starts off with the girl, excuse me, I'm losing my voice today. Girl's Guide to Witchcraft. And then there's several series in the book, and I think the series will continue. But I loved it. It's very super light reading, very, very easy reading. But, you know, it's very seasonal. It is also about one witch, Jane Madison, who discovers that she is a witch, and her cat is her familiar, if you know what that is in the witch world. It's like an animal form that's bound to the witch. And so the cat actually teaches her what she needs to know as a witch. And then there's a warder who comes, and he actually is getting his own spin-off series that just started. I haven't read it yet. But there's 3 novels in the initial story of Jane Madison coming into her powers. And then there are some novels that continue her story, opening a witch school. And then, like I said, her warder gets the story. Again, just if you want something light, fun, festive to read, I like that series. Hocus Pocus. Mm-hmm. So lots of us like the movie. It's kitschy. So they actually released, I think this is the 25th anniversary of Hocus Pocus. So they released a novelization of the first of the movie, and then in the same novel at the back end, there's a continuing story, which I believe is what they're going to be doing a remake of Hocus Pocus with this new story. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure that's planned. And again, full disclosure, this Hocus Pocus book with both stories is pretty long too, and I really just started the first story. So I haven't finished the book, but I'm still recommending it because for a book that's really just, at least the first story is just off of a movie that everyone watches or people watch every season. I thought the writer did a good job of telling the story and making me interested, even though I knew everything that was going to happen. It still was really vivid. I loved how the writer described things, at least so far. So check it out if you're interested. It's pretty cheap for hardcover. It's like $9.99 for both stories. And the author is A.W. Jampa. So don't know anything about the author, but like the writing. Lastly, I'll just recommend another book that I've just started, Rules of Magic by Alice Hoffman. It's a story connected to Practical Magic, which is a novel she wrote. I think this is the story that happens before Practical Magic, if I am not mistaken. I'm not deep enough into the novel to tell you for sure that that's the case. But again, like for me, the first few pages of a book, the first chapter, the way I see the writer writing kind of turns me on or off to a book. I will keep reading, like River of Grass, if you've ever read that. It starts off kind of slow for many pages. But once you like really get into it, that is like an amazing book. That's a tangent, but so that book has always taught me to stick with books for a little while before I decide to give up. But at any rate, this book by Alice Hoffman, for me, it's like pitch perfect of what I want to read this time of year. And I actually wish I would have started this one before Secret History of Witches, because I think it's going to feed that festive, I can't even say it, desire for it to feel like autumn that I would like from a book. So those are my recommendations right now. Again, only finished Secret History of Witches, and I've read the Jane Madison series, but the other two, check them out. I think it's worthwhile. You can let me know if you finished them before me, if you disagree.
I think I want to pick up Rules of Magic. I think that one I want to pick up. I heard really good things about it from people who have read it. So it seems interesting. I have not watched Practical Magic, so it'll be curious to see, maybe should I read Practical Magic before Rules of Magic, or should I start reading Rules of Magic first and then read Practical Magic, or watch a movie? I don't know. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, I saw the movie, and I never had the inclination to read the book, but having started reading Rules of Magic, I'm like, I need to read Practical Magic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let me know what you think.
I will. So.
All right, I know you have read a ton of books and have kind of focused on nonfiction this month, right?
Yeah, I'm focused on nonfiction, and there's 2 fiction books. So I read, for some reason, my game plan for Halloween was to read psychological thrillers, except that I didn't get to. I read a couple, but they were not that good. So, or they were they were expected. I read A Simple Favor recently, which the movie came out last month, and I would say skip the book, watch the movie. The book is okay, but it's not amazing. So watching the movie is probably going to be better than the book. So that's my take on psychological thrillers for this Halloween. We'll see. We'll see if I pick a couple more later on this month. But in terms of nonfiction, I read 5 of them. I read a few memoirs. I read a few who are investigative journalists on books, and then there was one that was really creepy. So the first one is Small Fry, which is Lisa Brennan Jobs' memoir. She's the eldest daughter of Steve Jobs. And what I learned from this memoir is that Steve Jobs is an asshole. He was not a good father. He was just not good. He was manipulative. He withheld his love for her. He didn't acknowledge her as a child. He was just not a good father. So it was one of those relationships that was just interesting. The best part was when he asked her if she's going to write about him, and she's like, no. And he's like, good. And I'm like, good job that she wrote about him. So, I love it. So for me, what I found was triggering was her relationship with her mother. It reminded me of my own childhood. And I have to share, my situation is very different now. That's not my current reality, but in my childhood, that was my reality. So it was interesting to watch and interesting to see and interesting to be triggered by that part of the childhood part. But, it was a good book. She's a good writer. I found it interesting. But if you're interested in Apple and Steve Jobs, I think this will be an interesting book to hear from her perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating to read beyond the lionization of, someone that people kind of feel is a profound leader. You know what they say, you don't want to meet your heroes. But it's things like that, especially in this era where we're focused and most of us are more focused and attuned to women's experiences, people of color's experiences, LGBT experiences, where some of these heroes, and I'm not saying Steve Jobs related to some of those other things had problems, but some of those heroes really don't embody the best qualities all the time that we're looking for. No one does, but we kind of lionize them and then think that they're so perfect, but the reality is often less than that.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, and they mention in other biographies, his relationship with his eldest daughter is a difficult relationship. So it has been mentioned, but watching it from her perspective it was difficult to read. It wasn't that easy to experience, and I can imagine her experience will be, it's really tough. So, but he did pay for therapy, so he did a good thing. He paid for his therapist for pretty much since the age 9, until she was in college, and then he stopped paying for it. And his therapist was like, I'm just gonna charge you $25 so you can still see me. So, but he did go to therapy once with her, and the explanation why he was this way was that they're cold people. They're not lovable. They're not loving. So that's why they are the way they are. And the therapist was like, yeah, I get it. That's who you are. So it was just one of those things where I was like, it was difficult. It was a difficult book to read, but it was a good book to read too.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
Yeah. So the next book is Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies of Silicon Valley Startup by John Carreyrou. This is a story of Theranos, which is a blood testing company that was supposed to revolutionize blood testing by pinpricking your fingerprint, like through your finger, as opposed to intravenous blood testing, except they didn't do it. And they got billions of dollars in investments, and the thing didn't work. So the company was like secretive. There was a culture like they couldn't talk to each other. There was high security. They were like always paranoid. They were doing lawsuits for everyone, non-disclosure agreements. They were firing everyone. So it really was a really riveting book. Like you couldn't stop reading. Like once you got into this whole idea of like, are they for real? Like, is this like they're fraudulent? Like they're doing this? And the way the company culture was, it was just like so riveting that you couldn't stop reading. Like I read at work, which is you're not supposed to, but I was like, I can't stop reading this book. I need to know what's going to happen next. So that was a really good book to read.
I gotta read that. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I can't even. I mean, I can imagine that, but at the same time, just to enter into something that they knew they weren't going to do. That's just so odd.
And they got billions of dollars. It's like, and they got Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, all these like famous leaders were like behind it. They were like, oh, gung ho, like you're the best, you're the best, you're the best. And they were like, they were like the stuff didn't work. So it was fascinating to see. And they're right now, they brought criminal charges against them. So there's a lot of lawsuits. The company no longer exists. But yeah, it's an interesting story. And the way it came about was like from one whistleblower, the Wall Street Journal, like they were trying to stop him from investigating this report. That's how crazy it was. So
nothing surprises me anymore.
I know. So it was good. The next book is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. And this is a creepy book. This book is about the Golden State Killer, and it's creepy, engaging, it's horrible. I can't imagine what happened. It's just horrible what happened. I could only read it during the day. I couldn't read it at night just because it was too creepy to watch. The stuff that he did, it was just in the amount of people that he affected. So this book takes place before they captured the Golden State Killer. He just got captured in April. This book came out in February. So this story about beforehand of like trying to figure out who the Golden State Killer was. Michelle McNamara passed away before she ended the book. So it's actually ended by a few editors. So they're trying to come up with like what the strategy is. But Michelle McNamara was a great crime reporter of like just unsolved mysteries. Like she wove the story like you feel engaged to read. You read like fiction. I'm looking for the paperback because they're gonna add chapters about who the Golden State Killer is, like the person who did it and how they captured, because he got captured through DNA testing. So those databases like Ancestry and Gene 23andMe and stuff like that. That's how he got captured. So I'm curious to hear like the whole process of how he got caught and then who the person is. But this book was so good. It's definitely, and there's an HBO series which happened to start filming the day before he got captured. So it should be pretty awesome.
Oh, is the series a true crime series or is it a fictionalized account? Okay.
No, it's a true crime. This is a true crime memoir about the Golden State Killer.
Wow. So that is going to be.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was coming out.
Yeah, they start filming. I was like Wikipedia, and after I was like, "Who's the Golden State Killer?" Because I knew they capture him. And then they're like, HBO started filming on April 24th, and he got captured on the 25th. I was like, "Oh my god, like that's crazy!" It's like they start filming. They're like, "By the way, we just capture him, so we have material." So I'm assuming they're gonna do about the 10 years where he terrorized California, and then they're gonna be like, "Here's the Golden State Killer," you know, here's the person who got caught.
Mm-hmm.
So now into two celebrity rumors that came out in October. So I read these back to back a few weeks ago. So the first that I read was "This Will Only Hurt a Little" by Bissy Phillips. Bissy was in Freaks and Geeks in Dawson's Creek, and she came up with the idea of Blades of Glory with Will Ferrell. But there was a story about Blades of Glory in the memoir, because her ex-boyfriend took ownership. Like he bought the rights for it, and he tried to delete her from the name from selling the rights for the movie. So then they were like, "Oh yeah, she actually put it in writing beforehand, so they had to add her afterwards." So there was like really a lot of shadiness that happened with Blades of Glory, but she writes about that. The memoir, she really talks about tough subjects, like she gets raped, she gets an abortion, how she's portraying Hollywood. She does name names. James Franco hit her, so she actually talks about that story of when he hit her. And he's an asshole, I wasn't surprised. And then other people in Hollywood who were like douchebag, and she named them, and then she went back to them and be like, I'm gonna write about you in my book, and I'm gonna tell the story of how you were an asshole. So it was actually a really good book to read. It's entertaining at the same time. It deals with like real subjects. That's interesting to read.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next one is My Squirrel Days by Ellie Kemper. And so I read this right after Bissy Phillips' book. So I was like, I was like in a celebrity memoir kind of mood. So I was like, oh, let's just read it. And they both are so different. Ellie is like a goody good shoes. Like she went to Princeton. Her parents are present. She has a strong family connection. So she writes about auditioning for Saturday Night Live, The Office, and Breakable Kimmy Schmidt. She talks about improv, New York City, what it's like to live in New York City in your 20s, which is, as someone who has lived in New York City in the 20s, I can relate, and about Hollywood. And she does talk about Tina Fey, which is kind of fun. But it's very like, she's like a, I don't know, like it was like straight edge, kind of like, if Bissy was like rebellious, Ellie was like the straight A student. So those are my celebrity memoirs. I encourage you, if you're feeling the mood, then pick both up. They're really good. Also pick Tiffany Haddish, The Last Black Unicorn. That's actually a really good celebrity memoir. So those are celebrity memoirs if you're in the mood for those to read. I do want to share two fiction books that I read this month that you should pick out. So the first one's My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Tessa Muchberg. And the book is really about nothing. The book takes place with a narrator who decides to spend a year sleeping. So she gets drugged up. She finds a psychiatrist who gives her like all these prescriptions, and she's like drugged up for like the whole year. And the best way to describe this book is like a car crash that you couldn't stop watching. It's like you can't stop watching the car crash. That's how you can describe this book. It's like you can't stop. Like this character is just like drugged up, and she blacks out, and she goes on spending sprees or goes into binges, but she's like blacked out sleeping. So it's so good. At the same time, like I didn't get much other than she just slept for a whole year. The ending was really poignant, so that's one thing that gave it an extra star. The book takes place in 2000 and 2001, so if that gives you a hint of what the ending looks like. So, but I really enjoyed this book, so I think that's a book that you should pick up.
Can I ask you a question? It won't give too much away. Is she like addicted to the medicine? No, she just wants to sleep.
She just wants to sleep. Her parents died, So we don't dive into her history, but we feel like her parents died. So she's like an orphan. And she feels lost. She feels like confused. She's like, I don't want to do that. So she just wanted to sleep. She just felt like sleeping was gonna, if she slept for a year, she'll be healed. And at the end, you feel like she did heal after that. But yeah, it's like she's not addicted to drugs at all. She didn't like the drugs, but she had like a concoction of drugs to drink, to take.
Interesting. I actually got that book from the library, but I didn't get a chance to read it. And I had to return it because everyone wants to read it.
Yeah, I got it from the library. I saw Julie Vadnell, who's been a guest on the show. She posted on Instagram. She posted on her newsletter that she read the book, and I happened to have that weekend that book, and I was like, yeah, let me just pick it up. She likes it. Then we have similar tastes. I was like, let me pick it up, and I was like, this is amazing. It's like a car crash. It's awesome. So as someone who's not I like plot-driven stories. This is not a plot-driven story. Like this is a character-driven story, and I still enjoy it thoroughly a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the final book is This Is How It Always Is by Lori Frankel. This is Reese's October pick, and it's about a family of transgender young daughter. And it's a fascinating story. They held it as a secret for 5 or 6 years. And then the secret comes out, and they're just kind of like holding the secret. That's pretty much the wave of the story around it. It's like the secret of having a transgender daughter. And then trying to try to see, what they look like in puberty, just hormone blockers, or they're gonna do XYZ. They're gonna do surgeries and whatnot. So it's a beautiful story. The author's note definitely explains why she wrote the book that she wrote. So it was beautiful. I enjoyed this book a lot. I found it at times difficult to read about the family secret, but it was a poignant story to read.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
those are the books that I read. So hopefully you'll get a hint. I'm planning to read. Hopefully, I'm planning to read more psychological thrillers. I think that's the next thing that I'm looking to read. We'll see.
Well, I definitely like all the books that you've read. Like, it's a real good group to choose from in terms of reading. I think How It Always Is might be the one that I look at first from your list this month.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good book. I read it. I recommend reading it. It's a backlist book, so it's not a brand new. It's not a new release. It came out in 2017. And I heard mentioned a few times. So I had it from the library like quite a few times, and I happened to get it. I happened to figure out that the book was going to be Reese's pick for October, and I got it the day before, and I was like, I'm going to read it. So usually Reese and we have similar tastes with the exception of Still Lives. So, I call Reese like my friend. So, I figured like if she has this similar taste, then I'll probably like the book.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So now we want to hear what you're currently reading. Come on over to the blog, whattoreadnextblog.com, and share with us your favorite books that you're reading right now. We have a brand new Facebook group that you can connect with fellow readers and get book recommendations, and join us for our upcoming virtual book club next month where we're reading The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. To join the group, go to whattoreadnextblog.com/Facebook.
And thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We'll be back in a month with a brand new episode. In the meantime, if you do enjoy the podcast, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. This will help us get discovered by a new audience. Thanks, everyone.